Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg. Today we look at the 12-step program. It was first published in 1939 in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. And it's now the foundation for numerous programs outside of AA to treat addiction. How effective is it? If so, why? And is it equally effective with different addictions? With us today to discuss this is Dr. Michael Miller. He's the director of the Herrington Recovery Center at Rogers Memorial Hospital in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. He's a board-certified addiction psychiatrist who has practiced addiction medicine for 30 years, and he has been the president of the American Society of Addiction. Thanks very much for being with us today, Michael. I wonder if you could briefly summarize the 12 steps.
Boy, that's a nice opener. Well, the 12 steps are considered a path to recovery. It was originally developed by a couple of guys who got together, a businessman, Bill Wilson, and a doctor, Dr. Bob. And this was in the 1930s. And each of them had struggled with their own alcoholism, and each of them realized, I've got to figure out a different way. And they said, what if we do it together? So it's a process of trying to recover from alcoholism originally with other people, but following a particular path that was outlined in the book that you referenced, published in 1939, that most people call the big book of AA.
And these 12 steps, will we be here all day if you tell us what they are?
Well, you know, I don't think I could recite them word for word off the top of my head. But one of the interesting things, and I think one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, is that it provides a helpful path for addressing alcoholism, but it works well for addressing any chemical dependency. But it also, quite frankly, is a path of healthy living and a good balanced mental life and spiritual life. And so they're really what I call a non-specific way to feel better and function better. It can apply to many aspects of life.
Well, I happen to have a summary from the APA, 5 or 6 lines, if I may. It says, admit one cannot control one's addiction or compulsion, recognize a higher power that can give strength, examine past errors with help of sponsor, make amends for these errors, learning to live a new life with new behaviors, and help others who suffer from some addiction. That's how the APA summarized the main points. Does that fit for you? Does that sound?
Well, that's a summary. That jumps over all 12. The first step of AA is admit that there's something going on that we have not been successful addressing through our own means, and saying that, you know, our methods aren't working, maybe there's a better way. Mm-hmm. So accepting that we are powerless. There's certainly controversy in many of the concepts of the 12-step program. Some people argue that the concept of powerlessness sort of flies in the face of the concept in psychology of self-efficacy. Mm-hmm. But the general idea is admitting that there's something here, and then getting out of yourself and being humble enough to say, maybe there's a way that I can find outside of me. And one can use the concept of higher power, that there is something greater than me, but actually it's just anything outside of me. And to say that I need to be humble enough to look at another way, and maybe with the assistance of someone else. So again, the higher power concept is probably what AA is best known for. AA is criticized for being religious, which it absolutely is not. But the concepts of spirituality were not unique to Bill W. and Dr. Bob. They picked it up from some other writers that preceded them. I find that people get hung up on that issue of spirituality unnecessarily, and that the process of healing and better functioning can work really well if there's absolutely nothing religious at all, but using spirituality to look at how connected you are to yourself and to the world around you, what your values are. You can leave it at that level, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with God, they use the term God and quickly qualify that to say, as you understand God to be, and you can understand God in many different ways. And as the bumper sticker says, dog is my co-pilot. You can play with the concept,
right.
And it absolutely doesn't have to be anything that reminds you of maybe the religion of your youth that you're not comfortable with.
You know, kind of hearing underneath this, drop your hubris.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That is really part of the issue, is that we talk about, in psychological terms, the sort of pathological narcissism of some people thinking, I've got all the answers, I can do this by sheer force of will, come on, let me just try harder to use the talents I have. No, it's taking that and putting it on the shelf and saying, hey, look, I don't have all the answers. If I did, I wouldn't be in this predicament. Let's be real about this. If everything was working, I wouldn't have a problem now.
So one thing is surrendering this hubris, saying I need
Absolutely.
help. I need
Letting
some support.
go.
I need
Right.
some help.
Right.
What are some of the major other points in those 12 steps besides the surrendering?
Well, actually, it is a very social program, and I use that in the sense of human beings are social animals.
Mm-hmm.
When we are completely disconnected, when we're completely isolated like a rock, that's considered pathology, because we are interactive organisms, and we learn about ourselves through our interactions and our relationships. And one of the things that AA says is, this is not individual contemplation. This is connection with others. So, one of the concepts says, let me understand those aspects of myself that aren't ideal, that the term character defects is used. You don't have to use that term. But after doing what they call in the program a searching and fearless moral inventory, I love that term, a searching and fearless moral inventory, then, well, that was nice, then share that with someone. I mean, you figured that out, but it's a lot different to actually be with another human being and say it and share it.
What happens when you do?
And
Why is
own
that
it.
different?
Well, it's transformational. It's transformational. It's very helpful in any sort of behavior change. Now, thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm well known by my friends as being very digressive. I'll go off in many different directions. But this concept of being public, if, for instance, you're wanting to lose weight, one of the things that will really help you lose weight, go public with your plan. Tell people wow. I'm on a diet. Then, if it happens that your behaviors don't align with that, your friends may notice and go, I thought you were on a diet. You see? And that can be helpful. One of the big things to stopping smoking is declare it. So, we've all been through this. Any listener will understand these basic concepts. To be honest with yourself is hard. To really tell yourself the truth and get rid of all of your rationalizations and your baggage, that's hard. But to actually say that to someone, it's a very interesting psychodynamic process of making it more real, making it public. So
it makes you more accountable as well.
Absolutely more accountable. And then as you go through the 12 steps, realizing that you're a fallible human being and that you have made mistakes that have hurt other people, that's one thing. But then there's the process of sharing that and then making amends when it would not harm someone else. There's all these little qualifiers. Right. Don't go telling everybody everything if the disclosure would be harmful to them. This is not about harming other people. So it's a very interesting set of principles that's philosophical, psychological, and the solutions really are we solutions. They're social.
Okay. Alcohol. What percentage of people do you treat with the 12 steps? Or let me begin with asking, do you use this in your treatment program and at your hospital?
I was exposed to addiction treatment. I've had a very unusual, truly unusual career. It's not usual for medical students to be exposed to alcoholism treatment or recovery. I was in medical school and in residency. And I was certainly exposed to programs that did utilize the 12 steps. And I've always been very warm to the 12 steps, and I've certainly been someone who embraced rather than rejected. And in the current program at Rogers Memorial Hospital in Wisconsin, we certainly use the 12 steps as a foundation of the recovery model that we use with other models. It blended in with other models. So yes, I use it. What percentage of people have alcohol addiction? The national statistics are around 7%. Okay,
7% of Americans are alcoholics.
But that's a pretty large number, really.
That's a very large number.
That's a very large number. 20 million.
Yeah.
Run the math. Okay.
These are drinking alcoholics, or any include abstinent alcoholics, or
no, they include everyone who is current or past.
Okay.
Okay, it's a lifetime prevalence. But yes, alcohol addiction is common, and AA. It's so ironic if you look at the title, "How 100 Men." So AA at first, well, for a long time, there were some issues with getting women involved, and did women feel like they were really accepted? And of course, the first woman to recover using the 12 steps is a woman named Marty Mann, who became
Right.
famous, and she was the founder of the National Council on Alcoholism.
Oh. What
So-
year was it? What year was her?
Oh my goodness, I would tend to think that was in the 40s. I wish I
Okay.
knew exactly.
Yeah, close enough.
It really is for men and women. It really can work for, I think, any cultural group, any socioeconomic group. And as we referenced earlier, probably a number of life maladies, a number of diagnoses, and not just addiction. It certainly is used for a variety of compulsive behaviors. There's Overeaters Anonymous, there's Sex Addicts Anonymous, there's Workaholics Anonymous. There's all sorts of ways that this is approached. But again, it's when you really get into the process, it's hard to knock the process. If you, for instance, say that you are a secular humanist, the concepts of AA fit very well with humanism. It's a very humanistic approach to facing your issues, transforming your life, having a better life, being more accountable, with the endpoints being, I think, the same endpoints that Freud mentioned: love and work. To have relationships that are healthy and to be productive members of a society. And addiction gets in the way of your relationships and your productivity.
I know this might sound like a silly question, but can AA be enough for many alcoholics to become abstinent? I would assume not all, or you wouldn't be in business.
Not all, or the treatment program where I work would not be in business, is true. But many people stop drinking with no particular help. They do, in fact, just stop. Many people use AA alone. It's interesting. I'm part of a email chain of other members of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. These are physicians who practice addiction medicine. And of those who are in recovery in that professional society, a significant number did it through AA without going to professional treatment. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. These are doctors you're talking about?
Yeah, recovering doctors. So, sure. But professional treatment is there when you've tried it yourself, you've tried using the peer support of AA. If those haven't given you the results, you seek professional help, like you seek professional help for a lot of things in your life.
Let me back up. You said 7% of Americans are alcoholics. What percentage of that 7%, if you know, are abstinent? What part of that 7%, and what part are drinking alcoholics?
Yeah, I should have that exact statistic. You know, what percentage of people have alcohol addiction in remission or in recovery? It's going to be a minority of that 7% for sure.
In recovery?
Yes. Most alcoholics not in recovery. If you look at some broad statistics, if you determine the rates of this condition in the general population, 97% are not in professional treatment and have never been in professional treatment. 97,
Wow.
a very small percentage actually get professional treatment. And of those who don't get treatment, the majority of those don't believe they need it. They just don't understand that they have a problem. Their family may know it, their coworkers may know it, but in their heart of hearts or in their mind, they don't have it, again, because the denial process that reframes reality and tells them, I'm okay, this isn't a big deal.
Why do they do that?
To not hurt. Why does anybody have a defense mechanism? They're there so that we don't hurt. If we saw things as they were and felt things as they were, it would hurt. So, denial is a great thing. It allows us to get through a lot of things in life.
I would also imagine the pleasure of drinking, or you're looking forward to your next drink, right?
Well, that could get us off on an interesting tangent. Alcohol is a euphoriant. It's something that makes you feel good. It releases dopamine in your brain. And getting a buzz is something, people have argued that it's a natural part of human existence to want to get a buzz and change your consciousness from time to time. But with alcoholism, most people aren't having fun anymore. It's a very fascinating process how the emotional systems of the brain operate. When you are enslaved to alcohol, when you have addiction, you're using compulsively, and that joy or fun is not there like it is before you have addiction. It's very interesting. A great quote that I heard a few years ago when dealing with this topic of recovering physicians, because I do this in my professional life, work with doctors who have addiction. It's so poorly understood. The phrase was, most physicians think that alcoholic doctors are having fun. And in fact, most people addicted to alcohol, whether they're physicians or any line of work, aren't having fun anymore. Their emotional system has changed. They're miserable. And the process of trying to tweak neurochemistry and have fun again actually makes you more morose.
Wow.
And
so when you go drink, you get each time you
the process drives you lower to a lower emotional state.
Let me speculate that you're getting worse and worse off on a secular trend, but each time you take a drink when you haven't drunk in a while, you feel a little better than the moment before.
You're chasing something, but it's very fleeting, and it's not the rich enjoyment that you have if you're an episodic, non-addictive user. It's fascinating that way.
There's this notion that you need to hit bottom to get better.
Isn't that an interesting concept? And of course, you understand that people play that in different ways, and it's make the data fit your model, or make your model fit the data. You haven't hit bottom enough. Obviously, the reason you're not doing well is you haven't hit enough of a bottom, or your bottom's different from other people's bottom. I think the concept of hitting bottom actually isn't necessarily tied to how much misery you have. I think it's actually based on your turning point, your transition point. When did you come to acceptance? When did you say, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture? When did you internalize, all these things people are saying, they probably are true. Maybe I need to make a change. So, again, what is the bottom for anyone with any behavior change? Somebody who is out of control with their gambling or their spending or their eating. How much pain do you have to have attached for your transformation? Some people need a lot of pain because defenses are so strong. But people can make the U-turn at different points along the continuum. So I think it's almost metaphorical. The bottom for you was the point at which you accepted that you were powerless over this. It wasn't working, and you needed to change. And Dick, I'm sure you're familiar with change theory and the ideas in psychology about motivation for change, but it all just has to do with when's your time, and again the sort of philosophical thing here, and I think we all know this from our own just personal lives and everyday experience. You don't have to go to grad school for this one. When someone has a big problem like addiction to alcohol or cocaine or pills, it's generally not a secret. They may want people to think that it's a secret. Other people know. The person with addiction is sometimes the last to know. So everybody knows, and the world is saying, oh, this is such a tragedy. Do something. This is not good. We are impacted by this. And the person with addiction, through the defense mechanisms, goes, oh no. They reframe it. They minimize it. They rationalize it. And so the addict has their reality that isn't connected with others' reality. Hitting bottom is when you go, wait a minute, my reality is a delusion, and their reality, okay, that's... And so let me listen. Let me be open to this. And then the transformation happens and everybody gets on the same page.
This brings us into the subject of interventions, when the whole family and friends get together and 10 people sit around and say, Alfred, you're an alcoholic. And does that work?
It works. It works. Doesn't work every time. It's a great, great concept. Reverend Vern Johnson made this famous from the Johnson Institute in Minneapolis. I remember, I mentioned early in this podcast, I had the opportunity in medical school to be exposed to addiction treatment and recovery from one of my professors. And when the book Intervention was first published in the 1970s, he came to work one day and said, hey, treatment team, hey, I just read this incredible new book. It really is cool. It talks about how you can use family members and other people in a person's life to turn them around. It was, he was like, oh, and it was published in the 70s. So he was one of the first people to read it. But it works. And what the process here is one that you've got jargon terms for everything, but one of the jargon terms that applies is consensual validation. What that means is that this concept is validated through multiple inputs. Okay, and if there appears to be a consensus, and it's just pretty easy. Individual therapy of alcoholism historically has been problematic as far as generating results. Some people get well by going to see a psychologist or a therapist and just chatting and developing a plan. But that model generally is not effective, and part of that has to do with the power of the denial system and such, and how it's so easy for the person with addiction to hold on to all of their mental models, and someone else says, have you thought about something different? And they go, for something different, forget that. But the intervention is, I have my world, I live in a belief system. My goodness, there are 10 people who I really care about. They're all saying something. How can I possibly... It creates cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
How could I possibly hold on to this idea if there is such a broad consensus that there's a different reality out there? Maybe I should consider that their reality is right.
So as we see in the movies or on TV, it does sometimes work, and people then turn themselves...
Absolutely.
By the way, does... the 12 steps apply to all addictions?
It can apply to all addictions.
Equally well?
Equally well, absolutely.
Are all addictions equally addictive? Are all drugs equally addictive? I heard...
Is that a plant? Is that a planted question?
Yes, because I just heard this on NPR by a neurobiologist from Harvard who says that crack gets a bad rep compared to other drugs as super addictive. He said they're all equally addictive.
Well, you mentioned in the intro, thank you, is that I have served as president of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And as I wound down my presidency, I took on a project to lead a terminology group, and we came up with a new definition of addiction, which was published, it was adopted by the board of directors at my last board meeting, April 2011, and we went public with it that summer. It's on our website, www.asam.org, ASAM. And the definition of addiction says that addiction is addiction. It says that they're not addictions. It describes how the brain is different in the person with addiction. And we're working on a manuscript to get out there to sort of describe how we came to these conclusions. Addiction is not about drugs. It's about brains. And when the brain of the individual is hardwired in a particular way with regard to the circuitry and the connections and what happens, the pathology of addiction isn't that you use alcohol, crack, tobacco, or what have you. It's that when you use these things, they get you high. That's the little dopamine rush. That's all fine. But then your brain changes. And things can happen with your motivational hierarchies. Things can happen with your memory of previous events. You develop what's called conditioned craving and altered cue response. And these different aspects of addiction, which involve an interplay between drives to use euphoriants, we call them in our definition a pathological source of reward or relief.
Mm-hmm.
Your drive to pathologically pursue reward or relief through chemicals or something else, counterbalanced by inhibitory influences that come from your frontal lobe, how those two get out of balance and the green light wins and the red light loses. That
so your brain's a slippery slope where your brain is getting worse and worse at stopping you from this path.
Oh, absolutely. But it applies in general. So the disease of addiction associated with gambling and addiction associated with tobacco and addiction associated with Valium, and I must say, sadly, the truth is addiction associated with marijuana, which most people don't want to have to deal with. The process of addiction is the process of addiction. And one day, there will probably be a drug company that finds something that treats addiction in general. Right now, we're chasing after different medicines that might seem to work for one drug class, one pharmacological group, like the stimulants versus the sedatives versus the cannabinoids. We certainly have some nice treatments for the opioids. But in general, the day, I believe, will come when we'll have a more generic treatment approach. AA is, in fact, a generic treatment approach.
Okay. Do they share in common, every addict, that they're medicating for some other problem?
Say again, please?
In other words, there's other pain underneath their drug addiction that this is medicating to help soothe.
Well,
that you have to get to that.
I hear you. Thank you for that question. Some of the things that naturally come up in any of these conversations are the self-medication hypothesis is one. So let's deal with that. The other question is the one of the addictive personality. What is that? So, a pathological source of reward or relief. Is there something defective that you need relief from? That would be using drugs for relief. Is there something different about you that needs this supercharged unnatural reward? Is a gold star or a pretty sunset not a good enough reward that you need something with more oomph? Okay. It's pretty clear that there is a subset. You see, there's so much we don't know. So much we don't know. There is a subset of people with addiction that probably are born with intrinsic deficits in their reward circuitry, and they have a hole that they're trying to fill. And that's probably neurochemical even more than psychological. There are people who do have pain, emotional pain from loss. Trauma is a fascinating topic. What happens to the brain from post-traumatic stress disorder, from traumatic events, and that you're trying to address this, trying to soothe it, trying to fill the hole, trying to heal the wound. The psychological theories about addiction and how to deal with it that came out of psychology, psychiatry in the first half of this century or the middle part of the century, of the 20th century, were that alcohol, drug addiction were a reaction to some problem, and people were drinking in response to, and if you could find out what you're drinking in response to, why do I drink? Some people come to me, doctor, help me figure out why I drink. That's an elusive search. That's almost a search for the Holy Grail. And you're almost waiting for Godot trying to find that one. Because you don't have to figure out why you drink. The most important thing is to figure out that you drink in a healthy way and it's causing problems, and you must start with behavior change and not get all caught up in some sort of complex psychology about, why did I do this? No,
do you dismiss the theory that once you are abstinent, then you have to work on your psychological pain or you'll slide back?
Well, I think there's a lot more truth in that one. Going and finding out what your issues are.
But first you have to get to abstinence. Is that
because otherwise you aren't dealing with your stuff honestly. You're altering your state. You're changing the way you feel. You're not dealing directly with your issues. And so you have to take away all the layers and the filtering that comes from the intoxicants and abstain to start the process.
I'd like to close if there's anything you'd like to say about other myths or any myths about addiction that you would like to clear up.
Oh, what a great question. myths about addiction. How many libraries can we fill? Most people,
That's great.
most people believe that they understand addiction from their own experience because everybody has an experience. There's virtually nobody that doesn't know an alcoholic, or even more specifically have one in their family. Okay, drug addiction is so common. I mean, we talked about 20 million people having alcoholism. If you add the other chemical dependencies in there, you're closer to 25 million. But how many people are affected?
Addiction? All addictions, shopping.
Well, of course, we don't have any good data on the non-substance
gamblers.
addictions. Yeah, we have some data on gambling addiction. Probably 1% of adults and 2% of adolescents. More kids than adults, believe it or not, percentage-wise. But we don't know really the number of people that really, amongst the obese, how many have food addiction. We have no idea. That sort of analysis needs to be done. But no, the people impacted, the family members, the loved ones, the spouses, the children, the coworkers, the ripple effect. You've heard the term alcoholism as a family disease, and it doesn't just mean that it's genetic. It means that it has ripple effects and changes a lot of people. So everybody has experience with it. So they think my experience is the universal experience, and because of what I know this disease. The fact is, this is sort of the new insight. 98%, 99% people think alcoholism is about alcohol. It's not. It's about the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And how the brain of the person with addiction to alcohol functions differently than the brain of the person who doesn't have addiction when they drink with any regularity, when they expose their brain to this source of reward. So that's, I think the biggest myth is that it's all about the chemicals, when in fact it's all about the circuitry.
And what happens to that brain when they drink? That's startling or surprising?
Well, again, the features are impaired control over use, using more than you plan to, not being able to heed your own stop signs, being preoccupied, thinking about it, waking up in the morning, your first thought is altered cue response, having your drug hunger triggered by things that are neutral stimuli to someone else, they become a powerful stimulus for you. These are things that aren't normal. The things that an addict goes through, preoccupation, heightened cue response, compulsive use, or what we describe having a relationship with your drug. I mean, most people don't have a relationship with their drug, but if you talk to a person with addiction and you say, do you have a relationship with cocaine, they'll know exactly what you mean.
One more myth and we have to call it a day. Done?
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, and I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.